What's going on, everybody? Today I want to talk about dungeons and whether or not you should be running them. I will be going over all the exceptions, my data, and everything I've learned about dungeons in this video, so let's jump right into it. So before I jump into all the data I've collected about dungeons, I want to talk about some basics. And the first thing is every week there's 2 dungeons that are drop rate boosted. This week it'll be Mad King's Breach and Cavern of Echoes, and all my data is from there. The non-set boosted dungeons have just not been even in a consideration for me to farm because I highly value my time and there hasn't been a real pressing issue for me to go farm set items. So overall, hasn't been too big of a deal, and I've only focused on the increased drop rate dungeons. Second thing is, what are we actually getting from dungeons? Well, the only unique thing that dungeons offer are going to be the left side of your gear, these set items. Now there's 2 parts to this. One, there's just going to be the actual stats on these items themselves, the attributes, the magic stats, and then of course the sockets within them. And then you have the actual set effect, which is a 2-piece or a 4-piece currently, because we cannot access the rings yet. We need to go to Hell 4 to farm those in the dungeons. So really we have 2-piece and 4-piece. When we reach 6 pieces, this can change. However, we're going to be stuck here for another couple of weeks actually farming these 4-piece sets or 2-piece sets. So really that's what my judgment's going to be based on currently. Now we have pretty much exclusive set items. You can get legendary drops from them, but they're significantly reduced compared to normal open world farming. So really we're going to be sticking to set items, combat rating, and the set effects regarding set items. So with all that being said, we're going to jump into some of the data that I have about specifically one dungeon, but really all the set boosted dungeons, and then a little bit more into one dungeon. So we're on my spreadsheet where I've charted quite a bit of data, at least in the recent times, and I was charting the gems initially, and if many of you have noticed, not only from the Blizzard post but from your own experience, unbound gems are capped at 12 per day, so you'll see large stretches of gems and then just completely nothing down here. So I have lots of data on this. I want to showcase what I've kind of learned from this data and that I've charted. Now, granted, there's always more sample size to be got. There's always more dungeons to be run. However, this is very, very consistent from what I've experienced, as well as what many people have experienced when running a bunch of dungeons, as well as I think it's relatively accurate in terms of the runs that we've run, because we run over 220 runs that are charted here in this spreadsheet. And so I think it's decent sample size, not great, but not terrible either. So one thing that we want to go over is how many legendary are dropping, how many set items are dropping, and what are we actually getting from each dungeon run, how much time it takes, and the XP. All of that is very important to understand what we are getting out of it. And then, of course, we need to talk about what we're losing when we're farming dungeons. What's the opportunity cost? So first things first, you can see here, I charted my entire party, everyone that was running Hell 2. Now, during this time, we did not have Magic Find. None of us had any extra Magic Find than the other people. I think the one exception was Kyre here at about 5% Magic Find, so that's not a huge deal. And I think Smiley had 5% Magic Find. So Magic Find isn't really a consideration when we're talking about these because we didn't have any Magic Find modifications. Again, we don't even know what Magic Find does really within the game in terms of numbers, so it's kind of hard to evaluate how impactful Magic Find is. But what I will say is that Kyre's drops here and Smiley's drops didn't seem wildly out of the normal from Chosen's or myself. So that all being said, these are the kind of total numbers that I was able to acquire at the end of the day, and I'll go over them real slowly. I just want to make them very simple for some people to understand. So 222 runs were charted here in this spreadsheet. Of those 222 runs, we were able to acquire 9 legendary items. Okay, so that puts it at a 4.05% drop rate from dungeons. And then we also acquired 42 set items between all of us, and that means that the drop rate for this is about 19%. So this means that every 20 dungeons, well, actually even more than that, every 25 dungeons you'll run, you'll get 1 legendary item. And that also means about every 5 dungeons you run, you'll get 1 set item drop. Now, a lot of people have experienced very similar stuff to this, and I will say that every single time people say, I've run a bunch of dungeons, they'll say I run 3 to 4 dungeons that didn't get a set item. Very, very consistent with this. As I mentioned to a lot of people, it's RNG based, so you could run 20 dungeons and not get a set item, but with these percentages, you get an idea on how average you should be able to get a set item. Now, if we do this on an hourly basis, again, what we're assuming here is that we're able to have a party for the entire hour. We're also averaging at about a time of 3:45 per dungeon. And in this case, it's going to be Mad King's Breach. This is what this data is charted on, because that is one of the fastest dungeons. So if assuming you're in a pickup group, you're not going to be running, 245, or at some cases when we were able to get a really good party together, we were running at 220. Usually 345 is going to be honestly a generous estimate when you're running a pickup group. That means that we're going to be running 16 dungeons an hour, which means we'll get about half a legendary per hour, well, a little bit more than half. So about every 2 hours, we'll get a legendary, and then 3 set items per hour. So overall, not great. I mean, in combination, you'll get about 3.6 or 3.7 unique items per hour from running dungeons. Now, this isn't terrible, but it's also not great. And keep in mind that these are intensive grinds. You have to be sure you're managing the boss fight, you're managing your character, moving around, being wary of the dungeon mechanics. And again, this is one of the easiest dungeons in the game, Mad King's Breach. So this time, these stats could change drastically for more complicated dungeons like Cavern of Echoes, like Pit of Anguish, like a bunch of other dungeons. Temple of Namari has cutscenes, so you can even speed up the dungeon as fast as this. Our fastest times for Temple of Namari could be 4 minutes or so, because, well, a little bit faster than that, but because of the cutscenes. So this is a generous estimate for dungeons because of Mad King's Breach. And personally, I only ever run Mad King's Breach, even though I can't get all my set items from there, simply for the combat rating alone. Now, if we compare this to other areas, well, I also want to factor in the XP rates, because other areas get drastically increased XP rates, not just the set items. But we'll talk about set items, or the legendary items specifically, later on. And here on my second sheet, you'll see I've charted a bunch of XP rates over the course of about 36 dungeons. I didn't think it was necessary to go any further. This is in Hell 2, keep in mind, and no one had Treasure Hunter on at this time. So what we experience here is an XP gain of about 45,000 across our dungeons. Now, as you can see here, some of the times are going to be much faster than some of you will experience out there. You can see 256, downwards of 230, 220, and even, again, 230, 220. Our average time ended up being about 240 or 230. And if we take that average that I mentioned earlier, about 345, well, guess what? Our XP per minute's not going to be the 44,000, assuming 100% that you're going to see here. It's going to be more like 30,000 per minute, and that's going to be assuming 100% experience gain. Now, if we compare this to some other areas between the XP rates and the drop rates, assuming you're going to go farm Realm of Damnation for minutes or an hour or so, this will be drastically increased drop rate in terms of items as well as XP. For XP, if you're running some of the faster Realm of Damnations, you'll end up being about 90 to 120k experience per hour, or per minute rather, instead of the 44k, or in this case, the 30k experience per minute. So almost 3 to 4 times as much experience per minute that you're getting from open world. Now, this may not matter to a lot of people because XP does have kind of a diminishing returns on it, whereas legendary items, they also have a diminishing returns on it, but not quite as hard as XP. Now, in terms of legendary item farming in open world, if you're farming these way more increased spots in terms of XP and monsters, you're going to get about 6 legendaries per hour. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, well, I only get this, I only get that. Again, we're assuming a dedicated party for an hour, but so is this. This is also assuming a dedicated party for an hour. So that is the circumstances that we're in. And if you're in those dedicated parties for about an hour, you're going to get 6 legendaries per hour in open world, or in this case, 3 set items or 0.6 legendaries per hour in dungeon farming. So even with the unique items, you're getting about 2 times as many unique items from open world, as well as 3 to 4 times as much experience in open world. So both situations are way better in the open world. And so why do we even run dungeons in the first place? So there's a few reasons why I think people should run dungeons, but overall I recommend against running dungeons. And the reason for this is you're going to get so much more boosted value from running open world, because not only are you getting increased legendaries or the overall increased gear drops, but you're also going to have more options for your slots to drop, therefore increasing the variety of improvements that you can make. Whereas when you're farming dungeons, yes, you can drop legendaries, but keep in mind that oftentimes, even if you drop legendaries, even if you drop set items, they need to be exceptional. And on top of that, need to be triple stat to get max value from them. Now, most of this doesn't matter to most people because you need to farm a lot for this to happen. But if you want those exceptional pieces with those triple stat rolls, you're going to need to farm tens, if not hundreds of legendary items of that slot to get those upgrades. And you can see here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 triple stats and 2 exceptional pieces. And this takes me a long time of farming. Now, the one exception to rerunning dungeons is every time you swap to a new difficulty. Now, the reason why I say this is because if you go ahead and decide to farm, let's say you were to go farm dungeons right now, if I were to go farm a bunch of dungeons, which I did a little bit earlier to help out some people, but if I were to go farm a bunch of dungeons, not only would I want the combat rating from those pieces because I want to be able to progress further into the further difficulties, but I'd also want the set item that I'd want. For every class, this is different. Right now, I'm currently running a mount bank set and then a broken set. And honestly, these sets are actually incredibly impactful depending on what class you are. For example, this mount bank set is extremely impactful in PvP content, as well as any sort of really tough content like challenge rifts. This gives me the chance to kind of stay alive a little bit more than I would have otherwise. Or if you are a barbarian, or if you are a demon hunter, running a 4-piece War Rags of Shawl boss set is going to be absolutely amazing. Or a barbarian, you're going to run that Isatar set so you can run really quickly and get bonus out of your sprint. So those sets give you a ton of value, way more so than extra damage or extra stats you would have from your Arrow Keeper or from your legendary items on the right hand side. And so picking up that 4-piece of whatever it is, or 2-piece of whatever it is, especially for unique classes like the Demon Hunter or something like that, where they have a really important set, that is worth farming on the turn of the difficulty, because you can invest several hours at the beginning of that, get bonuses, get upgrades for your set items, and not have to worry too much about getting those triple stat items. For example, if I were to run into dungeons right now, you can see this boot right above me. I got this mount bank boot. It's a triple stat item. So in order for me to get an upgrade from dungeons for this item, not only would I want the set item that I'd want, but I'd also want an exceptional piece, and I'd want an exceptional triple stat item that has more attributes, and hopefully, because this is a triple as you can see here, I'd want a triple. Whereas if I'm farming legendaries, I don't care about the legendary item itself because I already have that essence transferred or whatever, or I'll get it by the time I farm it. So really all I care about is the upgrade itself. I don't have to worry about the set item factor. So that is a huge one, because not only are you going to have to farm these set items specifically, but you also have to farm the dungeons that are associated with these set items. So now we're not just farming Mad Kings, we're farming all these random dungeons incredibly often to upgrade our items, which are slower, and it can even be way slower than what we've experienced in Mad Kings. You know, on average for Pit of Anguish for a pug group, I'm running about 5 minutes on average, which is a minute 15 longer than Mad King's Breach. So that amount of items that you're requiring drops down significantly. So I highly recommend that when you're swapping over to a new hell difficulty, so for example, if we're going from Hell 3 to Hell 4, a great way to get a head start and to not worry about side items until the later Paragon levels is to farm it, hopefully beforehand if you're an absolute grinder, or when you actually acquire your Hell 4, start farming dungeons then. It's very impactful, especially when we get to Hell 4, because Hell 4 now unlocks these 6-piece set items, and for classes like the Demon Hunter, getting a 4-piece Shell Boss set, maybe a 6-piece Shell Boss set, and then matching that with perhaps if you want to farm a lot, an Isatar set where you're getting that speed bonus, or some other set that's really solid. The set items will get more impactful because they are multiplicative stats based on our own gear. So as our damage goes up, the set item goes up in value, and so on and so forth. So overall, what I would recommend is, at the end of the day, do not farm dungeons except for the turn of the difficulty to get your first initial sets out, because if you wait to the end of the difficulty, guess what? A new difficulty appears, which means your upgrades that you acquire, your set items that you acquire, are not going to get maximum value because you're just going to replace them in a little bit anyways, because the combat rating is massively increased or the stats are massively increased, etc., etc. So hopefully that gives you an interesting look on dungeons. I know a lot of people really dislike dungeons already simply for the fact that you need 4 party members. And that is a whole nother conversation about the convenience of dungeons, which is absolutely true. It's easy to farm a open world group from my perspective, but it's very difficult to find a dungeon group consistently, especially since it's a lot more intensive and a lot more complicated. So there you have it. Hopefully you enjoyed the data. Hopefully you enjoyed my opinion. Let me know what you think about running dungeons in the comments down below. Would you like to run more dungeons if they reduce the party size from 4 to 2 or 2 to 1? Let me know in the comments down below, because I think I would actually run more dungeons if I was able to just casually pull one up on my phone and do that then. Otherwise, stay away from dungeons because they're not casual, they're not fun, and they are very time consuming. So I'll see you for the next video.